Wow, you're starting with having me tear up. My grandfather always would say that we're poor in money but rich in food. We created moments of celebration around the table.
Oh, wow.
And my grandfather, was the only time he would laugh. It's the only time that he would relax and tell stories. My grandparents lived to surprise and delight people. That was their purpose. Delivering that joy, that unexpected, unbridled joy. I've got goosebumps as I'm saying that out loud. And that is what I took to pretty much everything I've done in my career.
I just getting goosebumps too, Chadwick. How do you convince the CEOs and the boards that you have to invest and pour into the brand's soul?
I get called when brands have lost connection with their core audience, and the numbers are showing that. You can be transactional or you can be relational. And relational is where the joy exists. That's when the consumers benefit. That's where the partners benefit.
Celebrity chef Chadwick Boyd has spent nearly 3 decades shaping food culture, both behind the scenes and in the public eye. He's worked alongside major media networks and best-selling authors, and today he focuses on partnering with global brands. But after years of helping others experience joy, Chadwick realized he had lost his own joy. This is the story of the role models who shaped him, the injury that changed everything, and the journey that helped him find joy again.
When did you notice that?
2019, I realized that I felt so drained inside. And literally in less than 2 seconds, I ruptured my quadricep. It was the most excruciating, extraordinary pain that I've ever been through. It wasn't just my leg, it was the essence of who I am. And that's where I learned about neuroscience and how our brains actually work. What we put into ourselves at the end of the day is what we wake up and bring into the day. The science data is showing us that we literally need.
So this is my grandmother's copy of The Joy of Cooking. And it's from 1946, a time where the world is crazy. People were trying to rebuild. It was trying to find home and community. And my mom gave this to me in 2021. And it was 2 weeks before she passed unexpectedly. So this book is very special to me. And Chadwick, over 30 years, you've helped brands build soul. You've been a TV celebrity. You've been a chef, so many things. But it was an injury and a recovery that actually you recognized that you had to stop performing joy and really start living it. So I'm excited to have you today. And we're going to talk about how the host actually stepped back from the kitchen to be the human to sit at a table. So welcome to the show, Chadwick.
Thank you. Wow, you're starting with having me tear up. What an opening. I have almost that very same copy of The Joy of Cooking, and I was just gifted it about 6 or 7 weeks ago in a surprise moment that had a very similar type of connection that you just described with your mother. So I feel it very much here.
What I loved about what I've learned about you is the fact that it's not just the recipes. It's really all around how we share joy. And I'm thrilled to have you on the show, Chadwick. And what I'd love to start with is there's a story I know you've told, but I want to go a little deeper on it. So I know that little 10-year-old Chadwick had a Betty Crocker book, made the steak Diane, and you served dinner at 10 years old. But I want to know, when did you was there a specific feeling that you said, you know what, serving food can change people's lives for the better? Was there a specific moment?
Um, I don't know that there was a specific moment. I feel like my early childhood was that I I am the first non-practicing farmer in my family. So I come from a pure line of farmers all the way back to the 1600s. I traced my roots a few years ago. And my grandfather always would say that we're poor in money, but rich in food. And what that meant is that for every occasion in our family, whether you graduated from kindergarten or turned 16 or got really good grades on your report cards, that we created moments of celebration around the table. We had great vegetables during the fresh season. We had really good sweet cream butter, as my great grandmother would say. And we had pies and biscuits. And that was where I felt it at the table. Now, the interesting construct there, though, is that I was a really different kid. I grew up in a conservative farming rural community in Pennsylvania where the men were really gruff
Mm.
and the women were the ones who held the family and the community together. And I never really felt safe around my uncles and my grandfathers and the men in the community. I didn't like that gruffness,
Mm.
but I noticed really early on that when we would sit down at the table, my grandfather, it's the only time he would laugh. It's the only time that he would relax and tell stories and really make me want to draw in a little closer. And so I didn't, before I had the language, I had the feeling, the essence of what joy was created and safety at the table.
That's so fascinating, Chadwick, because when I think about, honestly, the original name of this podcast was Bring More Joy to the Table, was the original name. And that really resonates with me, what you said, because you think about all the conversations that happen around a table, whether it's the good things, it could be the hard discussions, but there's something around sitting around a table that is part of this human connection, right?
100%. My grandmother passed, my last living grandparent, so I made it into my 50s with a grandparent alive, which I realize is such a gift because most people do not have that in their lives. And as we were getting ready to memorialize my Nana, fortunately in our family, we have a lot of photos. So we were pouring for weeks through photo albums and things. And I was so struck by how many of those photos were moments at the table. And we're not just talking about, the early 70s when I was born. We're talking about earlier, in the 30s, and even before that. And to your point, the table is the place where people feel safe, they can draw in, you forget your differences. It's where you feel welcomed and loved. And I think that is such a big metaphor, especially for where we are today in our culture. And it's what I bring with me in everything I do, whether I'm on television or I'm in a corporate boardroom, trying to help steer a brand.
Yes, and I know I actually saw the post that you had in the photo with your Nana. And I know that when reading that, I just felt it and the kindness. I mean, when you think about the differences of how you grew up on both sides, the farming side of the family, and then Grandpa Frank and your other grandmother, and those are just two very dichotomous family, or I guess archetypes or something.
Yeah.
But the kindness, that photo was just so beautiful in that moment. And having lost my mom in 2021, I definitely know it's just when somebody's so special in your life, they leave a memory and a joy, and you realize those gifts.
And hopefully that is a joy that you pick up for yourself and pass on.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to ask you a fun question, though, which is I think you had a job even before that 10-year-old steak Diane dinner. And what was your first job?
So my first job was a business. I was 7 years old, and I had a refreshment stand that my grandpa Frank built called Chad's Refreshments, where I sold homemade brownies, lemonade, and cookies. And I put the menu together myself. I did the pricing structure. I made the product, and I was the key salesperson.
Okay, so what did you charge? Do you remember what you charged for the brownies and lemonade?
Uh, oh gosh, I that's a really good question. I don't. It's probably was something like 10 cents or a quarter or something like that. But I do remember the morning of there was in the neighborhood that I grew up in, there was a community-wide garage sale.
Hmm.
And so my grandpa Frank built me this amazing, it blew my mind, amazing stand that was like 4.5 feet by 4.5 feet, and it had a spring-loaded door that you could step into it with a little bench in the back and a counter on the front that spilled out where I can put whatever I was selling. And it had this pitched roof with this sign at the very top that said Chad's Refreshments, and you couldn't miss it. I mean, coming down, the large street, I was definitely in business, and that's kind of where everything took off.
Oh my gosh, Chad. So I just thought of something, which is when you think about that, that was like marketing 101 retail space when you were
Yeah,
7 years old. And so you
yeah.
had your grandfather. I mean, that's so funny to think about when you think about your brand. You had to learn, you probably didn't recognize it then, but at 7 years old, you had presence.
Yes, and I think that it it felt right for me. Like I don't know uh, that many 7-year-olds are thinking, "Hey, I'm just going to step into this booth and I'm going to sell, I'm going to make and sell however much lemonade or brownies." But it felt so right for me. And then my next enterprise, so to speak, a few years later was I invented Chad Wrap. And it was my mother had a side flower arranging business where she had wholesale dried flowers and silk arrangements and ribbons and all kinds of decorations. And I took pine cones for the holiday season and made ornaments out of them. And I sold them for like $10 in like 1978. And I sold out. And I think I made like $200, $250 or something like that.
Well,
And
what,
for every little price tag on the back, I did a registered mark with Chad Wrap on it. So I was branding before I even knew what that was.
oh my gosh, that's so funny because, okay, first of all, when I was in high school, I tied those gigantic bows, like for not for Christmas trees or beautiful bows for gifts wraps. And so I can, it's like you loop and you loop and you loop and you have to pinch your fingers and all of that. And I never sold them, but I worked at a nursery and did that. But it is funny when you think about all of those little skills. What are the things that you take away? Because that pinecone story is awesome. And then, the brownies and the baked goods and the lemonade. What do you think that was already in you that you took forward?
I think what since you did a deep dive on me online and know the greatest teachers in my life, which are Grandpa Frank and Grandma Clara, my grandparents lived to surprise and delight people. That was their purpose. And I I've got goosebumps as I'm saying that out loud because there was something really wonderful when they would make something by hand with great intention to give to somebody else. And it didn't need to be somebody that we knew well. It could have been a teacher or a school board member, but it was always made with pride. And I just was like, there's something there about making something and delivering that joy, that unexpected, unbridled joy of, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful, so special, and somebody thought of me. And that is what I took from that experience and what I've brought to pretty much everything I've done in my career.
I was getting goosebumps too, Chadwick, because not only is it that surprise and delight of strangers, right? Like you were saying, it's people sometimes you might not know very well. But the other underlying part of that, I think, and we'll love your thoughts on this, is today it's so important that people feel seen. And the idea of what you learned at an early age of connecting with people to make them feel seen and special.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I bring to the work that I do at brands with C-levels, which is business, particularly in the consumer world. You have a choice. It can be transactional or it can be relational. And the relational part is where the surprise and delight keeps you sustaining and moving forward and able to reinvent.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would say, about your younger self, either something that you wish you would have learned earlier?
I'm doing a deep study on that now, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later. But presence, the ability to have presence, and meaning that bringing your whole self to everything that you do. And what that means for all of us is that instead of putting on masks or facades or constructing ourselves due to what somebody has told us to be or what a corporate structure asks us to be, that is not true to who we are. It's really about embodying presence. And I wish that I knew that at that early age, because I'd probably be Martha Stewart.
I love that. Well, let's actually connect the dots on a few more pieces, and then we're going to dive right into that because I think the power of the journey that you've been through, but I always look at it as the journey forward because, we learn from the past, but we want to always keep our eyes, path forward. But there were two other little points that I was so curious about, which is, I saw that you were actually in the movie Dead Poet Society with Robin Williams. And what I want to understand is what were the learnings that you had in that incredible storytelling and the master, oh my gosh, I mean, Robin Williams, what an amazing gift taken too soon. But I would just love, I mean, that's just remarkable.
Yeah, that was such a gift that was given to me. I was not a traditional student by any stretch. I was always looking for ways to get myself out into the real world for my education rather than staying within the confines of the school buildings. Um, and that opportunity literally came to me as I was the editor in chief of our school yearbook. And one December lunchtime, I was scanning the lunchroom, monitoring a line of students who were buying those books. And this woman who literally looked like she was like 7 feet tall, dressed all in black, stark white face. Her black hair is piled up on top of her head, and she had a clipboard. She was going up and down every single table, scanning at every student, and every now and then she would hand someone a piece of paper. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I need to be a part of that. And the next thing I know, I'm tapping her on the shoulder. She turns around, looks at me, head to toe, hands me a sheet of paper and says, come see me at 2 o'clock. And I was like, yes. And the next thing I know, I'm calling my parents and saying I'm going to be at a movie with Robin Williams, and I'm going to be working all Christmas break.
Oh, wow.
And I was in wardrobe. They shaved my head in a flat top, and literally I was working about 18 hours a day for about 3 weeks. And what I learned through that, I was already an actor. I did a lot of acting when I was in middle and high school. I was so drawn to The Craft by Peter Weir, who
Mm.
was not very well known at that time. And it also, there was a lot of tension on the set because this was Robin Williams' breakout moment where he was pivoting from being that comedian that we all loved in Good Morning Vietnam and Mork and Mindy to his first dramatic role. And there was a lot of tension to that you could feel on the
Mm.
set. Um, and so I remember watching all of that with my own aspirations. And what I did was decide that I couldn't ever do that.
Mm.
Um, and I wish I hadn't. I just thought, you know what, I'm never going to be that good. Rather than running up to them and, trying to get, you know, wisdom and, insights and encouragement, I really, I just felt like it was too big for me at the time. But it changed my life, and I'm so grateful. None of us knew it was going to be the huge box office success that it was, nor did we ever think that it would be up for Academy Awards. And it turned out to be this cultural changing movie that people, when you mention it on the street, people will say, "Oh, I love that movie," and they go back to time and time again.
Well, and I'll be added to that list. I love that movie. I'll be added to that list myself. I can just see all those kids standing on the desks. It's such a powerful movie, but I wasn't sure was there the unlearning that needed to happen too? Because clearly, even though you didn't go the actor route, you still became way in front of the camera. And so that business, it was just doing in front of a camera in a different way. So how would you think about that in business, pivoting from deciding what you didn't want to do into a learning maybe that you did want to do?
I tend to think that sometimes life gives us foreshadow, that it early on, it gives us something that makes a really lasting imprint, not just in our minds, but in our body that we feel.
Mm.
And doing Dead Poet Society was one of those things. I would say that, and sometimes we can get super close to something, and then we just need to let it go
Mm.
instead of forcing it, or um, we need to kind of let it have its own latent period in order for it to grow and develop. And fast forward then, so that was 1989. I let it go. I thought I was going to be Mike Brady from, the Brady Bunch as an architect. I went into architecture school. Turns out that I sucked at engineering and the whole structures part, but I was awesome at the presentation and the theory and all that kind of stuff. And I let that go, went off to Paris because my university didn't accept Latin as a language, even though I took 4 years of it. And I deeply fell in love with French. And so I went to school in Paris. Paris changed my life. I
Je parle
mentioned earlier,
français. Je parle français
oui,
un peu.
je parle un peu, oui. Um, and we'll talk about that
Yeah.
a little bit later too. But I was this kid that was born into this really small, kind of myopic rural place that was where I was to start. But I got on a jet plane, and this is before the internet and when your parents could come to the gate. And it was a big deal. My grandparents, my great grandmother, they all came with me to see me off to France because that was a huge change and shift in our family, that somebody was going off to do something like that. And
What do you
so,
think, sorry for interrupting, but how do you feel like if your whole family, what did that mean to you that they all were there? Because knowing that you mentioned earlier on that sometimes especially with the men. Maybe you didn't feel like, they were gruff and gritty, that you didn't fit in. But like the fact that they all were there, what did that mean?
Oprah Winfrey talks about being the only woman in boardrooms and whether she was scared about that. And what she found to help her with that was remembering that she's standing on the shoulders of those who came before. Um, I felt like I was standing on their shoulders because without my grandparents, my mom in particular, my great grandparents pouring into me, um, I wouldn't be there. I literally would not have been able to step foot across that jetway and go and do that. And I think we all knew from when I was really, really little that I may have started somewhere, but I was meant to go really, a lot farther. So
Yeah.
that was that big moment.
Well, and it's that notion that how much our parents shape us and our grandparents and our support systems. And as I think about it, again, it's all these connective tissues. Letting go happened again, that we'll talk about in your current pivot. And so many things of letting go allows you to grow. That expression that letting
Yeah,
go, to grow, you actually do have to let go. But
that's
let
right.
me cover a couple other quick things just for fun, and we'll keep these kind of shorter. But there was the other fun story that we'll just do a little snippet on, which is now I'm learning a lot about you, Chadwick, because when I saw or heard that story about you going up to the 7 foot tall lady, tapping her on her shoulder, taking initiative, the lemonade stand, taking initiative. There's another story when you were 25 years old, 4 a.m. in the morning, reaching out to CNN for fit. And so I see this common thread of reinventing and initiative.
Yeah.
Because at 25 years old, and I'd love to have you tell the story very briefly, but to me, when I read that, I thought, oh my gosh, at 25 years old, because I've done a lot of media, as you know, too. And at 25 years old, when you're not really, let's say, professionally accomplished yet, and having the courage or the, craving, I'm going to do this. But you know what? You already had it from 7 years old to tapping the lady. So that was probably no big deal for you at all to make that call at 25.
Well, so what you're referring to is picking up the phone and pitching a fried chicken story to the CNN Southeast bureau chief at 4 a.m. because it was strategy. That's when he was at his desk and when nobody was interrupting him. So I was like, makes great sense to me. And I mean, what
So,
better story than a fried chicken story?
and it was for a restaurant brand, right?
Yeah, it was for Church's Chicken.
All right, because I'm sitting here in Texas, and Church's San Antonio. That's where they're born and raised. Church's Texas. But that's
Yeah.
great. But so it was strategy. So again, another tying element to your brand consultancy work that you do. You knew when that person was being sitting at their desk and taking your call. So what happened after?
They did this story. He did the story. And that was actually the beginning. I have many stories like this, but that was actually the beginning of my relationships with CNN. And I have several very good friends who either have worked for and are very well known, tied to the CNN brand because of that. But, I have very similar stories about the Today Show and, other media outlets too.
No, that's fascinating. That's why we needed a 2-hour version of this one. But the one thing I wanted to also, because you mentioned Church's Chicken, which was also kind of this foreshadowing of the consultant work that you do today. And I know that you help big brands, whether they're restaurant brands, they're food brands, but I love the fact that you try to give them soul, help these brands find their soul. But doing what I do for a living, knowing that a lot of boardrooms are very data driven, how do you convince the CEOs and the boards that, yeah, the data is good, but to survive, you have to, invest and pour into the brand's soul?
Um, it's actually not that hard. The data typically isn't that good. It's typically plateauing, and they've spent a lot of money, and there hasn't been that much change. Or it's that been this like slow decline, and on the inside they're still trying to drink their own Kool-Aid,
Mm.
and and it's not a fun place to work, and there's a lot of tension, um and so it really becomes it's not that hard of uh an a decision making process to go really look at your numbers and look at where you want to go and make the decision. You can continue to do the same old, which doesn't feel good. The numbers aren't increasing the way you wanted to. And the people that you want to connect with either don't really like you, don't find joy with you, or haven't stuck around with you, and you're chasing yourself around trying to find a way to connect with them.
You know,
So it's really not that hard.
yeah, well, and it isn't, but it is, right? It isn't, but it is for some. Because I think what happens, and tell me if you experience this, where I think sometimes when brands find themselves in that position, because that's where we share a lot in common, where companies will call me when, business is flat or declining. But sometimes it's so easy to go back to the tried and true things, whether it's just let's crank new innovation, let's discount, let's do bundle deals. And it's those things, if you don't have the brand sold, those things don't work. And then you just ruin the middle of the P&L and the bottom of the P&L. So
Right.
I go back to that surprise and delight that you mentioned earlier. And that's what I feel like could be missing in today's so many brand experiences, whether it's, yeah, exactly. It's the brand soul, and you've got to be able to surprise and delight the guests. So
Yeah.
how do you how do you bring that surprise and delight idea to the boardrooms?
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier of you can be transactional or you can be relational.
Hmm.
And relational is where the joy exists. And let's be very clear that surprise and delight and joy isn't just external. It's also internal, because when the teams are in their flow internally, that's when the consumers benefit. That's where the partners benefit. So a lot of I get called when brands have lost connection with their core audience, and the numbers are showing that. And they're oftentimes, especially in food, what I find is that there are a lot of people who are in cubicles, who never get out into food culture and really understand what is making and shaping food. And when I am allowed to bring that in, it's amazing how the energy shifts and change, and the eyes are like, oh, we can do that. Oh, that's a great idea. It's like we're doing with McDonald's. McDonald's several years ago really was not connecting with millennials, and they wanted that coveted target audience. And we went in and started to work with people at all different levels of McDonald's and brought insights. And really, what was it lying in plain sight was the fact that millennials wanted protein, they wanted convenience, they wanted fresh food. Well, guess what? McDonald's had been doing forever.
Mm,
They've been making breakfast in every restaurant fresh every day.
right.
Eggs, protein, sausage, protein. And so it was like, oh, let's do all day breakfast. And that became one of their biggest moments. Their sales in 9 months rose to 6%,
Well,
which is unheard of.
yeah, and breakfast, obviously, even today, fast forward all these years later, breakfast today is still a growing day part for a lot of brands, and new brands like Snooze or First Watch, these breakfast AM eateries. So breakfast outside of the home continues to be, and I can say, okay, Chadwick, you started it all.
Well, I mean, if you think, as I'm saying it, it's like There, in my view, because I am I live, breathe, food, but there isn't something that brings more surprise and delight than a really great breakfast. It doesn't matter what time of day it is, right?
Okay, so I am one of those breakfast any time of the day kind of people. And what is I wish I could come to your house and you could make me breakfast, Chadwick. Next time, whenever I'm either in one of your whichever market you're in, I'm coming to your house for breakfast. But what's your favorite
Okay.
thing? What's your favorite thing to make besides biscuits? Because I know that's the
Well,
thing. I know I'm going to
that's what I was gonna say is I'm the biscuit master. Biscuits are definitely on the menu. I love eggs. Eggs are probably my number one, besides butter, one of my number one ingredients to cook with because you can do so much with them. And I love to make a great omelet,
Mm.
whether it's a 30-second Julia Child omelet or a puffy omelet in the omelet or in the oven that bakes for 20 minutes.
Okay, I didn't even know you could do that in the oven. So that tells you what I know about omelets.
Well, you need to take one of my online courses.
I should do that. I should do that. I will have to give a shout out to my son because for the holidays, we decided to shake it up a little bit. You know, all the good china, the good silver, the crystal. You'd be so proud of my table, Chadwick. And we made different things. And so my son actually made a delicious quiche and a cast iron stove. And it was the hit of all, yes, turkey and ham, fine. We didn't have any biscuits, but next holiday, we're going to have some biscuits for sure. But, what I'd love to be able to do is I want to take it to a little bit different place. When I talk about, you mentioned this really early on, and you talked about sometimes that being on, given your role of being on camera all the time, always on, that sometimes you end up putting that mask on of joy. And was there a time where you realized that maybe in your job, that external felt joyful to people receiving it, but then internally, maybe you weren't as joyful? When did you notice that?
I realized up until 2019, I realized that I had lost myself, my true self, by bringing joy to other people. That I was really good at doing that, but when the cameras were off, the office door was closed, the conference calls were done, I felt so drained inside. And that ability to get back up and like get out there and turn it on and do that, we can only do that for so long. And it's going to manifest in burnout or, in other ways in our life. And I that's when I really started to understand that there's joy appearing, and then there's joy as presence. And that's probably my biggest key piece of wisdom that I'll be espousing for the rest of my life.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir on that because it's hard doing what we both do for a living. There are times where, there's this idea of joy makers and then joy takers. And there are times where, we have to be that joyful person. But at the end of the day, that silence and that peace and that calm we need to be able to recharge our own batteries. And I think that it can be a mask. Do you see that in corporate America too, where you feel that sometimes corporate America is wearing these masks?
Oh, 100%. I think that's one of the things that we're trying to reconcile and recover from. Caroline Wanga, who was the CEO for Essence for several years, really incredible talent. She talks about you cannot change who you are, but to be who you are, change where you are. What that means is we spend a lot of time trying to change who we are to fit into a particular culture, whether that's a corporate culture, a societal culture, or whatever. And trust me, as an openly gay man, of over 50 years, I know that really, really well. Um, but people are doing that in all kinds of corporate environments because they think they need to advance or whatever. But what Caroline was saying is that we cannot really change who we are. We need to be everything of who we are and put ourselves in environments where the who of who we are can thrive.
That is so powerful. Where were you 10 years ago for me, Chadwick? Because, sometimes for me, there was a huge pivot in the pandemic, like so many, 2019. That's when I decided to measure joy in the middle of a global pandemic, 1,000 surveys every single week. And people thought I was crazy. But I find 5 years now, almost 6 years later, I never really could articulate why this journey has been the way it is for me. But I feel like by definition, what you said about finding a where people appreciate joy is what's given me joy, right? And allowed me to do my dream. So when you think about that presence, what are the things that for you are most important to feel that presence each and every day?
Well, gosh, that's a seemingly simple question, but it's pretty deep. For me, it has been a very painful journey of discovering. Um, I know for me that structure, routine, um, paying attention to what my energy needs first. There's an adage that many leadership uh, gurus talk about where, if the plane is going down, the first thing that you need to do is put the oxygen on yourself first before you give it to others, because we need to optimize ourselves before we can give to others. Our society and a lot of corporate cultures still don't espouse that. But for a lasting, sustainable culture, we need to give ourselves the things that feed us, that optimize us, that allow us to be present with who we are, so that we can be present with other people. And with 24 hours in a day, everybody's got the same amount of time. Doing that investment, which is typically a short amount of time, typically in the mornings, really maximizes the efficiency of your time the rest of the day and who you're working with. And what that does, and this moves us into neuroplasticity and neuroscience, is we are literally working with our brains that allow us to have the fullest capacity of our brain to be present in our work. When we are in meetings, when we are talking to people. Most often, though, when we don't do that, 40% of our brain or more is tinkering and thinking about and ruminating on other stuff. And we've got that half in, half out feeling. And we've all felt that. We all know what that is like. But when I find for myself that it is meditation, it is writing things down, it is doing affirmations. I know a lot about our subconscious now, because what we put into ourselves at the end of the day is what we wake up and bring into the day. And there is nothing that impacts more than the work that we do and our families.
Well, it's a big answer to a simple question, but it is it's a complex question. So I heard just the other day while I was watching a podcast on YouTube, the fact that Grace Andrews, she worked with Stephen Bartlett, and she had a statement that I can't stop thinking about. She goes, you have to stop consuming basically social media in order to allow your brain room for creativity. And people are so much content. And like for me, doing what I do for a living, I feel like I've got to be reading what are the trends, what it's out there. And it's consume, consume, and consume. And then there's no RAM left in our brains to actually do the creativity. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that, about having to have space for creativity.
Yeah, so in our world where our phones, are computers that are literally attached to our hands, right? Um, it's difficult to self-manage the quiet moments where it's easy to pick up the phone, open up a social media platform, look at, who's talking about what or whatever. We're confusing that as productivity
Mm.
versus where we now know, and since you are such a data person, you can appreciate this. The science data is showing us that we literally need to slow down in order for us to uh, to share, to process, to compute. That there is a capacity level that we can max out in our human brain
Yeah.
that deadens the work that we do. That's where we get homogenization. That's where we get, people who are not enriching themselves, where we get cultures that are not growing and that are not advancing. That's where we get anger from. That's where we get the loneliness pandemic that we are dealing with, which is literally a crisis.
It is a crisis. Yes. Well, and I think, yeah, the loneliness, my data shows, I mean, it's crazy that 4 in 10 Gen Z, report being lonely, and yet they're the most connected generation. And so it shows the fact that connectivity is really being disconnected, not connected. But I'd like to it kind of weighs heavy on the next topic, which is, I know you had a severe life-altering injury in Paris. So I would love for you to share that. You had to relearn, train your brain.
But it was actually my quadricep, which is the largest muscle group in our bodies.
Mm.
And in less than 2 seconds, I ruptured my quadricep and it fully detached from my body. And I knew in that moment that something significant had changed. I thought, okay, I'll go to the hospital, may have surgery, but in 4 and 6 weeks, I'll be fine. And I literally it was the most excruciating, extraordinary pain that I've ever been through. I believe that all through the surgery and the recovery time, but that was not the experience. And it ended up taking almost 3 years for me to fully recover. And that's where I learned about neuroscience and how our brains actually work. But that stillness, it took me 2 months to um, to be immobilized, to allow the healing to happen. And when you are very active, I mean, I traveled on Delta Airlines for about 65-70% of my life up until this time.
Wow.
So being forced to lay in a bed uh, for 2 months on two kinds of morphine and all kinds of other drugs, uh, that requires a lot of mental fortitude. And it will force you to go into the deepest, darkest parts of who you are. And that's when I realized that really what was not rupturing and healing, it wasn't just my leg, it was the essence of who I am. And that's what changed the trajectory of my life. And it's only through not the first time of physical therapy and my attempt to try and run, because in the first year on the anniversary date of my accident, my goal was to be able to run, but I couldn't. My leg was not stable. I couldn't run a block, even though I tried. I tried to even force that, and it was not happening. And it wasn't until I connected to a physical therapist who was really progressive, who said, I know what is going on. Give me 4 months. And what he taught me to do was to stand in front of a mirror doing these really harsh, weird exercises. But I had to stare at my leg and reconvince my brain that it was okay for it to move. It was not growing, it wasn't stabilized because my brain was locked in danger, danger, do not move this leg because it hurts. And so I had to reconvince and override my brain's own recording that it was okay to move my leg. And thankfully, I am running again. I ran a 10-mile race last May with my siblings, and I met my physical therapist at the finish line, and we hugged and celebrated all of our work. But that is a metaphor for everyone and how our brains work in every situation. And that's what we're dealing with now.
Wow. Well, and I have to tell you, when I just heard, thank you for sharing that, by the way, because I know that that is such that's a tough story. But at the end, it's, this opportunity to reinvent yourself. And maybe it was the universe saying that there is an opportunity for the next chapter and the later is greater. But one thing, and you and I had a call before this, and, my work is all about joy is greater than fear, growth begins. And what you just shared with me, I think fits that, because the fear in your brain was that it was going to hurt, but the fear was greater than the joy of being able to walk or run and do the things. So until the fear reduced, you couldn't get back to joy.
Yeah, and the fear wasn't the moving of my leg. The fear was all the unresolved stuff from earlier trauma in my life that I had um, tried to run away from. And
Yeah.
every single human has that. Um, it's it's only when we actually are courageous enough to look at it, to go through it and come out on the other side. That joy phrase of joy cometh in the morning, right? Joy cometh when we go through it and get to the other side.
Yeah. And and you do. Sometimes you have to, as the saying goes, walk through hell to get to the other side. And you literally and figuratively had to do that. But with I think the storyline, I go back to that little 7-year-old and the lemonade stand and the retail brand and all of the journey along the way actually set you up for that moment to reinvent yourself. And I know, as hard as it was, I feel the energy from our conversations that it is the right destiny for you at this point in your life. And that's a special moment, hard to get to, but special. I did want to actually ask you, part of our kind of tradition on our Business of Joy podcast is paying it forward by asking kind of fun, random questions. I call it my lightning round. So, are you ready for our lightning round?
Let's do it. Bring it on.
So,
I love surprises like this.
and I know it's kind of a pivot from, I want to bring you joy by asking you these very fun questions, Chadwick. And it gives you an opportunity, because I guess before we go there, I really am so grateful for you. Laura McCorvey introduced us, and she's like, you've got to meet my friend Chadwick. He is all about joy. The journey that he's been on is just phenomenal. And I just want to, thank you for sharing such raw moments with us, because others can really learn, I think, from the experiences that you've shared. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Leadership requires vulnerability and wisdom. And that's, if there's anything that I've learned, is that you can go through that hell and convert it into wisdom. And that's when it becomes something that I feel like it's a responsibility to share that with others to make us collectively better.
And whether they're personal challenges, you having an injury, whether they're business challenges where, what does tomorrow hold, those that vulnerability is important in our professional lives as well as our personal lives. And taking off the mask is critical. Okay, well, are you ready for some
I'm ready. Let's do
joy
this.
questions? So I have 3 cards in front of me. And since we're doing this virtual, you're going to do left, right, or middle to pick a card. Pick a card, any card, Chadwick.
I'll do left.
Left. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's see.
Interesting. So, what are you most afraid of feeling?
Ooh.
That was a deep one.
What are you most afraid of feeling? Um, interestingly, um, pure joy. I don't know. I've done so many joyful things, but I don't know if I have gotten to that full embodiment, and I don't know what that feels like. And so my brain still is like, where is that? What is it? So I look forward to it, but it's a little trepidatious.
Yeah, that's a great answer because when you've spent your whole life surprising, delighting others and providing joy for others, it's hard to know for yourself. So that's a great answer. Okay, so my next tradition is every guest gets to write a question. And so my prior guest, who did not know that you were in the food business, wrote this question, which I'm just loving the fact that it worked out that this question is for you. So I have it on my wonderful Joys of Choice little postcards. And this one is from a prior guest. What is the food that evokes a memory you cherish?
Tomatoes.
Tell me more.
So I have an essay that will come out in a major magazine next August, where it's a deeply personal essay about my Nana and our special connection to tomatoes. Growing up on farms, we preserved a lot of foods, but tomatoes were the number one thing that we loved. And so my very early memories were on Sunday evenings when we would leave my grandparents to go back home from Sunday supper, was going down into the cellar and grabbing quarts of whole tomatoes and taking them home. And I knew I have not known life without those in my life. So tomatoes are a cherished food in my.
Oh my goodness. So if there are 3 adjectives that surround tomatoes, because that's great, it's not the food. Tell me 3 adjectives around the memories.
Connection, kindness, and patience.
Whew, that's awesome. Who knew? I'm never going to look at tomato the same, Chadwick. I'm always going to remember your Nana and her story. So I can't wait till that article comes out in August. Well, Chadwick, thank you so much for investing in joy, investing in all of us. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And the audience and all the viewers are going to love this episode. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I've had a joyful time. I appreciate it.
And the last tradition is that you get to write. Now, I have my book here, and we are going to get your question in my book. So what I'd love to do is have you write a question for my next guest. All right, so go for it.
Okay.
Yes, you can just write it.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Okay.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Have a great day.